Gross, Mike, that's not funny. Sarah pulled her jacket tighter around herself like the thin fabric could actually protect her. Mike was staring into the woods, flashlight shaking in his hand. I swear I heard someone laughing. Jenny, curled up in her sleeping bag, hugged her knees so tight it hurt. She wanted to say something, but nothing came out. The wind swept through the clearing and blew out half the embers, leaving only the smell of burnt wood. Kevin poked the ground with a stick. Skinny, glasses slipping down his nose. But his eyes kept moving, jumping from shadow to shadow like he knew one of them was about to move. It was the wind, Sarah said, but her voice cracked. They heard it again. There was no wind. A low laugh, dragging and slow, like someone laughing behind a closed door. Mike swung the flashlight back and forth, lighting up tree trunks and branches. But nothing. See? Sarah said, but her eyes didn't believe it. Kevin took 2 steps forward, still holding the stick with a sweaty hand. It's there, he muttered. It's watching us. A sharp snap, a twig breaking. They all turned at the same time. Kevin was there, and in the next second he wasn't. The stick hit the ground and rolled toward the fire. "Oh my God!" Sarah screamed. Jenny dropped to her knees, sobbing. Mike spun the flashlight around, panicked. "Kevin! Kevin!" The forest answered with silence. A silence so thick it felt like it filled their throats. The laugh came back, closer, way closer. Mike grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled. Jenny stumbled, but Mike picked her up. The flashlight shook, cutting shaky lines through the dark. Then the voice, clear. It was Kevin. "Hey guys." They froze. Sarah turned her head slowly, like her body didn't want to follow. The light found it. A tall, pale creature with glowing eyes, and a smile full of teeth way too long to fit in a mouth. Sarah screamed, "He's right behind me!" And the night swallowed everything. Far from there, a car moved along the dirt road, headlights cutting through the darkness between thick pine trunks. The creaking of the suspension blended with the distant sounds of the living forest, owls and insects hidden in the night. Steve Myers had one hand on the wheel and the other tapping impatiently on the dashboard. "You know what this reminds me of?" he asked, not looking at his sister. "The Blair Witch Project, National Forest Edition. I'll bet you $20 the local ranger tells us the same story. People getting lost, wrong trails, vengeful spirits, and poof, gone. All that's missing is someone saying there are witches in the woods." Joanna, sitting beside him, didn't answer right away. Her notebook was open on her lap, scribbles covering entire pages. She looked up just long enough to shoot a quick glance at her brother. If that's all it is, great. She went back to writing. Better wrong trails than vampires or anything that rips out guts. Steve gave a low chuckle. "Oh, too bad. And here I brought my gut-ripping kit." The wooden gate appeared ahead, lit up by the headlights. A worn-out sign read, "North Station, Forest Service." Steve parked the car, turned off the engine, and got out. The night air was cold, smelling of damp earth and smoke. The ranger waited on the porch of the small service cabin. He was a middle-aged man, his face weathered by time and his eyes heavy, like he hadn't slept well in years. He held a large flashlight in one hand, though he didn't use it. He seemed more comfortable in the dark. "You folks friends of Ethan River?" the ranger asked from the porch. "That's right," Joanna answered without hesitation. "Joanna and Steve Myers. Ethan said you needed help with something supernatural," Steve added. The ranger's eyes narrowed, sizing them up for a moment. Then he gave a small nod. "So he passed the message. Good. I wouldn't have called Ethan if it wasn't serious. If he sent you, it's because he thinks you can handle it. Come in." The inside of the cabin smelled like old coffee and damp paper. Maps hung on the walls, red pen markings highlighting specific spots in the park. Piles of reports were scattered across the wooden desk. The ranger pointed to 2 chairs but didn't sit down. "I've seen a lot," he began. "Careless campers, unprepared hikers. Those ones we find. The problem is the others. The ones who vanish without a trace. Not a single sign. It's like the forest swallows them whole." Steve crossed his arms, leaning back in the chair. "People go missing in forests all the time. Bears, wolves falling off cliffs. It's not exactly unheard of." The ranger's expression didn't change, but his voice got firmer. Bears leave tracks. Wolves leave blood. Here, there's nothing. Nothing. Joanna kept writing, her eyebrows furrowed. When was the first time? She asked. The man took a deep breath like he'd been waiting for that question. 10 years ago. A little girl. The lights in the cabin seemed dimmer as he spoke. And suddenly, Joanna felt pulled into the memory like it was a dream being told out loud. The girl stood in the middle of a hidden clearing, a circle of trees so tight it looked like a natural stage. She wore a dress stained with dirt, her hair tangled. She stared straight ahead but saw nothing. Her lips were dry, her breathing way too calm for someone who'd been lost for days. The rangers surrounded her, called her name, waved their hands in front of her face. Nothing. It was like she had become part of the landscape. When one of them tried to grab her arm, she resisted. With so much strength it was scary. They had to restrain her and carry her out. At the hospital, they found nothing wrong. No serious injuries. No explanation. Just that distant look like she'd left something behind in the clearing. The memory faded. The ranger looked back at the two siblings. Her parents moved away not long after. I never found out what happened to her. Silence filled the room for a few seconds. Steve was the first to break it. Well, at least it wasn't a werewolf. He gave a crooked smile. Because werewolves are way messier. Joanna shot him a disapproving look. You're not helping, Stevie. But the ranger didn't seem angry. Just tired. After her, there was a hiker. Experienced. Vanished in the same area. All we found was his backpack. And then more came. College students. Whole families. Some come back, but they're never the same. He ran a hand over his face like trying to wipe away memories. The clearing is in the northern part of the park. It's not on any map. I don't even like going there myself. But that's always where it starts. Joanna slowly closed her notebook. And this clearing, what do you think is in it? The man looked outside toward the dark line of trees. I think it shouldn't exist, but it does. And it keeps taking people. Steve took a deep breath and stood up from his chair. Then that's where we're starting. The ranger stayed quiet for a few seconds, eyes fixed on nothing, like he was listening to something only he could hear. When he finally spoke again, his voice was lower, almost dragging. I remember the last time, a year ago, maybe less. I was on shift at the station just before sunrise. The radio was quiet and I thought it was going to be another peaceful night. Then I heard a noise outside. He clenched his hand on the table, like he could still feel the weight of that moment. It was a boy. He was stumbling down the trail like every step might be his last. His clothes were torn, covered in mud, and his face looked like he'd seen the devil himself. I ran to him, tried to grab his shoulders, but he kept shaking. His lips were cracked, his whole body trembling. The ranger took a deep breath, his eyes drifting back to that morning for a second. I pulled him inside, yelled for someone to bring water, but it didn't help. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He just kept repeating the same thing like a broken machine. His voice grew rougher, like he was imitating the boy. It took them. It took them. It took them. Steve stopped pacing around the room. Joanna, pen frozen mid-air, waited in silence. That's all he said for hours. It didn't matter what I asked. Didn't matter if anyone tried to calm him down. Just that. The ranger shook his head. And I swear, when I looked into his eyes, it was like they were empty. Like his soul got left behind in the woods. He went quiet again after finishing the story. His hands stayed clenched on the table, like he was still holding on to that boy. The smell of cold coffee felt heavier inside the cabin. Joanna rested the notebook on her knee, writing slowly. Did he say what it was? The ranger nodded, but he looked hesitant. He said that he, his girlfriend, and another couple started feeling like they were being watched. Then they heard voices like someone was talking near the campsite, but no one was there. On the second night, his friend disappeared. Only the sleeping bag was left. They searched, yelled. Nothing. He said one moment his friend was right behind him, and the next he was gone. No scream, no trace. The next morning, the girl was taken. And he swears he saw the thing. Steve leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. And the girlfriend? Same thing. He turned to talk to her, and she was just gone, like she'd been erased. Silence fell over the table. The only sound was the slow ticking of a clock on the wall. And how did he escape? Joanna asked. The ranger ran a hand over his face. He ran, said he ran without looking back. Didn't stop until he got here. Steve let out a short, humorless laugh. Sounds like a fun party. Joanna shot him a cold look. 3 people missing, Stevie. Young, prepared. This isn't just lost hikers. I know, he said, though his tone still carried irony. I'm just trying to imagine how to put this in the local paper. Magical monster erases college kids from existence. The ranger ignored him. We searched for days. Found their campsite untouched. 3 backpacks, 3 sleeping bags, like they got up for a second and never came back. No sign of a struggle, no animal, nothing. Joanna turned the page in her notebook. The boy, is he still around? No, left the state. His parents came and got him. He'll probably never set foot in a forest again. Steve looked over at one of the maps marked in red. All of this happened near that clearing? Yeah, north end of the park. Always there. Joanna closed the notebook, setting the pen on top of the cover. Then that's where we need to start. The ranger looked up, his eyes tired. I don't want you to get the wrong idea. This isn't just a dangerous trail. It's not people getting lost. The whole place is off. Whoever goes in doesn't come out the same. Steve pulled up a chair and sat sideways, arms crossed. Off or not, we've seen it all. Werewolves, vampires, demons. A haunted picnic area isn't going to scare us. The ranger didn't smile. This isn't just another case. That place takes what it wants. I've seen too many vanish. And I know it's going to happen again. Joanna took a deep breath, her hands steady on the notebook. Then we have to stop it. Steve let out a theatrical sigh, getting up from the chair. Here we go. Another walk in the woods. Just hope there aren't any killer squirrels this time. The ranger didn't laugh. The creaking of tree branches outside the window seemed to answer for him. An uncomfortable silence stretched through the room until the man grabbed the flashlight from the table and fastened his coat around his neck. If you're going to see it, better now, before the forest changes its mind. Joanna closed the notebook and tucked it into the inside pocket of her coat. Steve adjusted the holster under his jacket and let out a heavy sigh. They stepped out onto the porch. The cold night air hit them like a bucket of ice water. The ranger went down the steps first, following the dirt path that led into the heart of the park. Steve and Joanna followed, their shadows stretching out across the ground lit by the moon. With every step, the darkness in the trees seemed to open its mouth a little wider, ready to swallow them whole. As the ranger led the way, clearing the almost faded trail with the flashlight swinging in his hand, Steve and Joanna followed close behind, alert to every snap under their boots, every gust of wind slipping through the tall pine canopy. Only clueless tourists or reckless kids come through here, the ranger muttered, his voice low like he was afraid of waking something up. It's like the woods swallow the path. Steve kicked a root, grumbled, and glanced at Joanna. Great. Haunted forest with an invisible trail. Just what I wanted for my birthday. Joanna didn't smile. She still held her notebook, flashlight clipped to her coat pocket. If this is where people go missing, this is where we need to start. The ranger nodded, saying nothing more. The night grew heavier the deeper they went. The moon barely made it through the thick canopy, and the breeze was cold, carrying the scent of damp earth and rotting wood. Steve was the first to stop. He stepped closer to a fallen log and brushed away dry leaves with the tip of his boot. Look at this. It was a knife. The wooden handle was worn down, the blade covered in rust. He picked it up carefully, brushed off some of the grime. The metal, cold to the touch, felt heavier than it should have. Probably belonged to some camper, the ranger said, not giving it much thought. Steve turned the knife over in his hand, thoughtful. Too old to be from just any camper. But who knows? He tucked it into his belt. Joanna shot a quick glance at her brother but said nothing. The path suddenly opened up. The dense forest gave way to a wide, uneven space. The clearing. The ranger stopped at the edge, like something invisible was holding him back. This is it. The silence deepened. No crickets, no owls. Just the faint rustling of leaves, like whispers coming from all directions. Joanna raised her flashlight. The beam flickered across the patchy grass over scattered stones and trees circling the space like walls. Steve stepped forward a few paces. Doesn't look like anything special. Then he heard it. A low laugh, distant, almost childlike. He turned his head. Only darkness between the trees. "Did you hear that?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Yeah," Joanna replied. The ranger said nothing. He just gripped the flashlight tighter, his knuckles white. Other sounds followed. Light footsteps, leaves shifting without wind, whispering voices. The clearing seemed to breathe around them. Steve tried to joke. "Looks like your invisible friends want company, Joe." But his voice lacked conviction. A shadow moved between the trees. Quick, pale. Then another, in the opposite direction. There was no clear shape, just flashes reflecting light. Joanna reached for the shotgun slung over her shoulder, fingers steady on the grip. "They're trying to lure us in." "Where to?" Steve asked, his eyes fixed on the dark. "Deeper into the forest." The ranger took a step back. "It's always like this. Voices, lights, shapes. Whoever follows doesn't come back." Steve raised the knife, almost without noticing. The old metal felt heavier, like it was reacting to the place. Then the laughter returned. Louder, closer. It sounded like a child's, but drawn out. Almost fake. "That's not human," Joanna said, her voice steady but low. The air turned cold. Their breaths came out in white clouds. The ranger's flashlight flickered weakly. Steve switched his on fast, but the beam felt too thin against the weight of the darkness. And then came the call. "Steve?" It was his mother's voice. Clear, gentle, like she was standing right behind him. His heart pounded. For a second, he forgot where he was. He wanted to turn around, to run toward the voice, but Joanna grabbed his arm hard. "It's not her." Her eyes shone in the flashlight's beam. "Don't listen." He took a deep breath, fighting the urge to follow. The voice called again, weaker until it faded away. The ranger dropped to his knees, hands covering his face. They always know what to say. They always know who to call. Steve helped him up, eyes still fixed on the trees. The figures were still circling, but they didn't come closer to the light. "Let's get out of here," Joanna said, "before it takes us too." Steve nodded. He put the knife away carefully, not even sure why. They followed the same path back. The voices were gone, and so were the shapes. Only the weight of the forest stayed with them. When they reached the main trail again, the ranger stopped, taking a deep breath. "Now you know. It's not your imagination." Joanna held the shotgun tight. "No, it's real." Steve looked back at the darkness that hid the clearing. The metal of the knife burned against his body like it was alive. "Then let's figure out how to end it." But as he spoke, he couldn't shake the chill down his spine. Because part of him knew something in the clearing was still watching, and it didn't like that they had left. The next morning came gray, with the sun trapped behind heavy clouds. The ranger's cabin smelled of old coffee and mildew. The table was covered with folders, reports, and photos taken over the years. Joanna flipped through documents while Steve stretched his legs under the chair, trying to keep his eyes open. The ranger stood by the window, his gaze lost in the woods, as if expecting them to walk in uninvited. 10 years of disappearances, all in the same area, Joanna said, spreading papers across the table. "But there's more. People who came back, different." The ranger turned slowly. "I can tell you a story. It's not in any official report." Steve raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I love when it starts like that." The man pulled out a chair and sat down. His eyes were tired, but his voice stayed steady. "About 8 years ago, a family camping near a stream. The little girl vanished, just like that. We searched for days, weeks. Her footprint stopped in the middle of the woods like the ground had been erased behind her. We never found anything. Until 5 years later, she came back." Joanna stopped shuffling the papers. "Came back? In the same park. Early morning. One of the rangers saw her standing near an old fire tower. Same little girl, same age, same clothes, worn and torn." He rubbed his face. "She hadn't aged a single day." Steve let out a low whistle. "You're kidding." "I wish I were." We brought her to the station. She didn't talk much, cried easily. But when she did speak, she kept saying one thing. The bear man. Said he took her to a cave. Swore she'd only been there a few days. But out here, 5 years had passed. The silence grew heavy. Joanna stared at the table as if trying to make sense of the words. Steve broke it. Jinn makes people believe in different worlds, dreams, illusions, explains the weird time, the messed up memories. It's not a jinn, Joanna countered. Jinn leave marks on the body, that girl had none, and jinn don't give people back for no reason. Steve sighed, running a hand through his hair. Then what do you think it is? Joanna pulled one of the books from her backpack. It was thick, bound in worn leather. She flipped through it until she found a page with symbols and notes scribbled in the margins. Fairies. Steve laughed, humorless. Fairies? Don't tell me we're going up against Tinker Bell now and that Peter Pan and the Lost Boys are next? Yes, fairies. Joanna pushed the book toward him. The old kind. The ones that existed long before our bedtime stories. They take people, mess with time. Sometimes they let their victims go, but never the same. They come back distant, confused, like part of their memory or soul got left behind in the fairy realm. Other times, they don't let anyone go. The person just disappears forever. The ranger didn't seem to doubt it. Whatever it is, that's what's killing people in my park. Steve glanced over the lines in the book, frowning. All right, let's pretend it's fairies. How do we confirm that? Joanna turned to another page, showing symbols marked in red ink. Iron. Always iron. It hurts them, drives them away. But it only weakens. To force them back to their realm, we'll need a banishment ritual. Steve raised an eyebrow. Ritual? You mean like candles in ancient Latin? The dangerous kind, Joanna replied, eyes still on the book. Iron keeps them at bay, but it doesn't solve the problem. Only the spell can send them back. The ranger pointed to the corner of the room where a small stone fireplace sat cold. Leaning against it, a fire poker still had soot on the tip. And that? Will it work? He asked. Steve picked up the poker, turning it in his hand like testing its balance. The iron was cold, but solid. That'll work just fine. By late afternoon, they returned to the start of the trail, the sky already turning orange. The wind blew hard, carrying the scent of dry leaves. Steve drove the iron bar into the ground, placing it across the narrow path that led to the clearing. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Just the wind. Just the creaking of trees. Then, a soft voice drifted through the air. Joanna. It was a woman's voice. Familiar. Joanna felt her heart race, but she stayed still. The voice came again, closer now, almost gentle. Come with me. Steve glanced at his sister, alert. It's not real. Before Joanna could answer, something burst out from the trees. Fast, like a cold gust of wind. A tall shadow, thin arms reaching out. Steve stepped forward and struck with the iron poker. The impact cracked, both sharp and hollow at once. The creature let out a high-pitched metallic scream and dissolved before their eyes, like smoke pulled back into the dark. The silence that followed felt heavier than the attack. The other pale figures shrank back, circling between the trees, but didn't dare come closer. The iron had worked. Joanna kept the shotgun raised, steady. See? It hurts them. Steve took a deep breath, his hand still tight around the poker's handle. Who would have thought? Fairy hunting. I'm gonna need a lot of coffee to process this. The ranger watched silently, his face pale. If it works, how do we use it against them? Joanna didn't take her eyes off the darkness. Iron weakens them, but it doesn't send them back. We're still going to need something else. The voices returned, whispering again. But now they sounded farther away, more cautious. The wind blew strong, carrying the chill of night. Joanna shifted the shotgun against her shoulder, resolute. They won't come back. The sun dipped behind the ridge, casting the forest into shadow. The iron bar still burned hot in Steve's grip. The next day, the radio crackled on the station wall, a voice breaking through the static. Help! Lake, they're here! The ranger shot to his feet so fast he nearly knocked over the chair. He spun the dial, trying to stabilize the signal. The voice returned, clearer now, thick with fear. They're everywhere, they're surrounding the cabins. More interference, then muffled screams and the sound of wood being struck. The ranger pressed the transmitter. "Talk to me, Jim. What do you see?" The reply came in a thin thread of panic. "Pale, standing in the water watching us. They don't blink. They don't blink." The radio died in static. Steve stood up, already grabbing the poker he hadn't let go of since the forest. "Well, looks like the party's moved." Joanna grabbed the shotgun and filled her pockets with shells. The lake. Now, the ranger didn't need to be told twice. He rushed ahead, snatching the Jeep keys. The engine roared to life, kicking up dust in the yard. The narrow road to the lake was choked with low white fog drifting between the trees like smoke. "High noon," Steve muttered, looking out the window. "And it feels like a nighttime horror movie." "Focus," Joanna snapped, firm. The ranger gripped the wheel tight. The dashboard radio crackled now and then, voices swallowed by static, as if the trees themselves were trying to muffle the calls for help. When the Jeep broke through the trail and reached the lake's edge, the sight hit them like a punch. Capsized boats floated near the dock. Torn fishing nets were scattered in the mud, like they'd been slashed by claws. 2 cabins still had smoke rising from their chimneys, but the doors were hastily shut, the windows boarded up with makeshift planks. Screams came from inside. Out in the water, the fog was forming shapes that broke apart and reformed. Sometimes they looked like drifting logs, sometimes people. Standing. Still, a man came running from the shore, stumbling through the mud. His face was dirty, eyes wide with terror. "They're here. They want in." He tried to push past Steve, but Joanna grabbed his arm. "How many are in the cabin?" "3. My wife and my girls." He shook free, nearly knocking Joanna over, and ran down the road, vanishing into the fog. "What a brave family man," Steve said with dry sarcasm. "Runs off and leaves his wife and daughters behind." He looked at his sister, then at the ranger. "Well, at least now we know they're not just after tourists." At the side of the nearest cabin, the Fae were clawing at the wood with long, razor-sharp nails. A pale figure pressed its face to the window, banging against the glass again and again. The screams inside grew louder. Joanna raised the shotgun. "They're not just scaring people, they're hunting." Steve gripped the iron poker tightly. The ranger shrank behind them, hand firm on his holster. "I've never seen them come this far. Never to the lake and never in daylight." Steve shrugged. "Guess we pissed off the neighborhood." Then the voices started. First a murmur, then louder, clear as a whisper right by the ear. "Joanna, Joanna, come." She clenched her teeth. "They're calling my name." Steve turned to her, serious for the first time. "Then let's make them shut up." Joanna took a deep breath. "If we don't act now, they'll kill everyone." Have you ever tried following complicated structures to write your own stories? 3-act structure, the hero's journey, or other rule-heavy methods, and still nothing flows? Yeah, that used to happen to me too, until I realized the problem wasn't the structure. It was not having strong ideas to start with. In the first pinned comment, there's a free class that shows you how to unlock your creativity using simple, direct prompts. It's quick, it's practical, and it could unlock your writing today. Now let's get back to it, because the fight is far from over. Steve charged up to the cabin and slammed the poker against the door with a crash that made the air tremble. The sound echoed through the cabin like thunder before a storm. "Hey, Tinkerbell, let's see how you handle real iron." The creature at the window backed off for a moment, but quickly pressed its face against the cracked glass again, desperate to break through. Inside, voices screamed for help, mixed with the crying of children. "Let's go," Joanna said firmly, shotgun raised. She moved quickly up the porch steps. The ranger followed behind, trying to organize the chaos, turning screams into orders. Steve kicked the door in. The wood cracked and gave way, revealing chaos inside. The family huddled against the wall, eyes locked on every gap as if the dark might bite. The air was thick with mold and fear. A shadow slipped through the glass, pouring into the room like liquid. Screams tore through the air. Joanna fired without hesitation. The regular shell made the creature stumble back, shards flying, but it didn't vanish. Steve charged with the iron and struck from the side. The hit rang out, metal on bone, and the thing exploded into dark dust that spread like smoke. "Looks like Tinkerbell went back to Neverland," he said, breathless, clutching the poker tight. Don't count on it, Joanna replied, eyes locked on the window. The others came next, not like soldiers, but like a starving pack. They appeared from different angles, slipping through wood and shadow, filling the room's corners with movements far too fast. The space itself seemed to twist around them. Joanna fired again, this time with a salt round. The blast lit up the air with a flash, and the creature shrieked in a high mechanical tone before dissolving into mist. The victory lasted seconds. Another was already crawling along the wall like a spider. "To the bedroom," the ranger shouted, pushing the family into a smaller room. The door slammed shut, muffling the children's cries. Steve looked at Joanna. He saw more than fear in her eyes. He saw resolve. She reached into her coat and pulled out the grimoire, its cover hard and worn. She dropped it onto the table with a thud. "This is it," she said. Steve nodded. He drove the poker into the floor at the center of the room like planting a flag. The iron holds them back. If they stay within a 10-meter radius, the spell won't let them escape. But if even one gets out before it's done, everything fails. "Then I'll intercept them," Steve replied, and his voice sounded like stone. Joanna began to recite. Her voice wasn't soft. It was steady. Old syllables, stretched and slow, vibrated in the air like invisible webs. The space seemed to shrink. "Exilium aeternum, vinculum ferrum, lux veritatis, audi nos, regnum vetustum, claude portas tuas. In nomine sanguinis, in nomine memoriae, radiatis ad umbras, radiatis ad vestras tenebras." The words slammed against the walls like winds from an unseen storm. The air thickened, heavier, each syllable making the wooden floor tremble. The Fae went wild. They slammed into walls, scratched the floors, shook the cabin. One tried to escape through the broken window, but Steve cut it off. The iron struck its body hard, drawing a scream that sounded like an electric shock. In the same instant, something tore across his arm. A deep, hot gash, blood running down his forearm. He didn't let go of the iron. He gripped it with both hands, even as blood dripped, holding back the writhing creature before him. Another lunged at Joanna. Steve threw himself in the way and drove the poker into the creature's chest. It burst into black dust, but in seconds the pieces began to gather again, reshaping the Fae. But the spell caught it midair and the dust was dragged away, pulled out of this world, banished back into the supernatural. "Keep going," he shouted. Joanna didn't stop. The words came sharp, each one tearing out of her throat. The cabin's air was thick, walls groaning as if something inside them was trying to break free. The Fae pressed in. Voices echoed, distorted names, whispered promises. A dark hand slipped through the crack of the bedroom door, almost reaching the youngest child's leg. But the ranger struck it with the butt of his pistol, knocking it back. Steve staggered as another creature struck him from the side, a gash along his ribs that set his whole body on fire. He spat blood and held tight to the iron, forcing the thing back toward the center. "Hold them," Joanna shouted, not breaking rhythm. "2 more Fae incoming." He held. His hands were slick with blood, his body screaming, but he didn't let go. He was a wall of flesh and iron, and nothing got past him. The final line of the ritual came out like a roar. "Radiatis ad umbras, radiatis ad vestras tenebras." The air cracked, like shattering glass. A green light flooded the room, filling every corner. The creatures froze, twisted in place, then were sucked outward, turned to dust, spinning upward, disappearing through an invisible tear above the lake. Silence fell all at once. Steve dropped to his knees, the iron poker still clutched in his bloody fingers. Joanna closed the book and collapsed beside him, gasping like someone surfacing from deep underwater. The ranger opened the bedroom door. The family stepped out slowly, eyes filled with fear and relief. Outside, the lake was just water again. Steve spat blood and muttered, "We won." But did they really leave for good? The ranger stepped closer, gun still in hand, eyes fixed on the now dark windows. "So they can come back?" Joanna nodded. "One day, yes. The banishment seals the passage for a while, but the path still exists." The man let out a long breath, weary. "We won today, but the forest still belongs to them." Steve looked at them both, sweat on his face, voice low. "That's more than we had yesterday." No one replied. Silence settled again, heavy, but without the same immediate fear. Just a strange emptiness like the space left behind after a storm. Outside, the mist had started to fade. The sun, low in the sky, painted the lake in orange and red. Joanna helped Steve to his feet. He leaned on her, still holding the poker like it was part of him. "Let's get out of here," she said. The ranger motioned for the family to follow. They stayed quiet, every step weighed down by exhaustion and disbelief. Behind them, the cabin stood empty, marked only by claw prints and shattered glass. Reminders that something had been there. Steve took one last look at the water before moving on, and he didn't like the way the waves were moving. Dawn came slowly. The fog still lingered around the area, but the sun pushed through in thin streaks. Steve stepped out of the cabin, his arm bandaged and strapped against his chest. Limping was inevitable, but not the sarcasm. "So that's it? We kicked out Tinkerbell, took down Peter Pan's crew, and saved the day. I think I at least deserve a statue in the town square." "No one's building statues for us, Stevie," Joanna said. He scoffed and opened the car door with some effort. "Good. I don't have the patience to stand still anyway." The joke hung in the air but didn't pull a smile. The rescued family had already been taken to the nearest station by the ranger. Outside the house, the forest ranger stood still. He wasn't looking at them, only at the woods. Hat in hand, gun on his belt. The posture of someone who knew nothing was over, only paused. Joanna walked up to him. "You did what you could." He shook his head slowly. "I know, but it doesn't feel like enough." Steve leaned against the car, exhausted. "Welcome to the club." The man took a deep breath. "I'll need to beef up patrols, warn the locals, and when the police ask, tell them it was a bear," Joanna interrupted. "They never believe us anyway." The ranger looked at both of them for a moment. "Thank you." The word came out like it was hard to say. "Just don't mess with Faye again," Steve said, half joking. Joanna pulled her brother into the car before he could say anything else. The engine roared and the siblings drove off. As the car rolled down the dirt road, the ranger shrank in the rearview mirror, but he stayed where he was, facing the trees, as if waiting for the forest to scream. If you've made it this far, congrats. You've escaped Neverland. For now. Because not all fairies sparkle and some lost boys were never meant to come home. In the next episode, the Myers siblings face something that feels like it came out of a storybook. But it smells like sulfur and tastes like a lie. A creature that flies on a broomstick, stirs cauldrons, and lures with promises far too sweet to be true. But behind the spell, there's an ancient ritual. One powerful enough to wake something crueler than the devil himself. And don't forget to subscribe, because around here, every creature you recognize is one less trap you'll fall into.